Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our main stage panel, Transforming Payment Data into Valuable Insights. I'm Allison Barbosa, the Chief Commercial Officer from Women in Payments, and today I'm joined by George Evers, Senior Vice President, Customer Solutions Group Product Mastercard, Eddie Kim, Principal Applied Scientist at Xero, and Grace Lee, Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Scotiabank. Let's start off by talking about the risks and rewards of payment data. We've all heard that data will unlock infinite possibilities, but there are guardrails that need to be put in place. Tell me, what does that mean to each of you and your organizations? Eddie, why don't we start with you?
Great, thanks. So at Xero, we've made some really interesting explicit public commitments to how we're going to use data. We call these our responsible data use commitments. And it's a relatively unique strategy in the tech ecosystem. If you think about some different tech companies, especially some major players in the tech ecosystem, their data use policies may be a little bit esoteric. It might not be all laid out there, but Xero has taken a very open approach to this. You can go literally to the Xero website, things like xero.com/data or something. And at the top level page, it's all laid out, these principles that we're trying to stick to when we use data, when we build products with data, when we have access to customer data. And so we kind of list these out and try to really stick to them in the way that we are dealing with customers' data. And just for the sake of time, I want to highlight maybe two examples that really stand out as guardrails and also as North Stars and really guiding us for how we can responsibly use data. So the first one is called open and honest. And what that actually means tangibly is that if a customer signs up for a Xero product or a Xero service, we really go through the efforts of letting our customers know, what the benefits are, right? Like why do they even need to give us their data? What are we trying to do for them with that data? Exactly how it'll be used. And if that data needs to be provided to anyone else, so for example, this could be an app in the Xero ecosystem, who is that data going to be provided to, and why would we do that? So that's one of those principles, open and honest. Another one is data-driven decision bias. Now, and I'm a machine learning and AI scientist, so I find this one very interesting. That with data, with AI comes this great power, but also great responsibility to really understand how we're affecting different people, different demographics. When we make decisions using AI, when we make recommendations using AI, not everyone will necessarily be treated fairly by default, right? You can imagine a quick example like loan approvals based on using zip codes or postal codes. What if some of those are not treated as fairly as others? And we do a lot of research and a lot of development in making sure that we understand and protect our users from this kind of bias. So those are sort of examples I'd give.
No, that's great. Thanks. Grace, how about you? What do you think in terms of in your organization?
Yeah, you've heard it all. So data is at the heart of everything that we do. Data is the new oil. They're all trite statements, but they happen to be true. So if you think about what data actually is, it's the actions of all of our customers, all of our employees, all of our stakeholders across the ecosystem, and each piece of data is a representative of an action. And if you think about all the actions that happen, millions, billions of them happening at a time across our footprint, one of the first things that we need to do is understand what that data actually is, and be able to understand and trace its lineage, how it actually travels through the organization, how it's ultimately being used, and is that in service of our customers and aligned with our values. So very similar to Eddie, we have a very strong data ethics culture at the bank, and we have been very public about our commitment, actually recently publishing our formal ethics commitment on our website, and actually launching what we call the ethics assistant, which is basically a way for us to walk the talk on ethics across the bank. So for any model that we build, whether it be a marketing model, a risk model, or otherwise, it actually goes through a very comprehensive assessment of what kind of data is being used, how are we thinking about it being applied to a customer problem, is that something that is worthy of further investigation, and therefore what should we do, and how can we inform the business about the use of that data and actually engage the customer directly in that conversation. So I think it's really important not only for us to do the right thing, but to know when we are.
Interesting, Grace. Thank you. And George, what about you and Mark and Mastercard? What do you see in terms of the risks and rewards of payments data?
Yeah, and I guess for Mastercard, so through our ability and our kind of expansion into all payment flows, so across account to account, card, and blockchain, processing payments as at a network level is something where we could need to take privacy and the protection of data extremely seriously. So it's central to the build out of all of our core systems in terms of things like privacy by design. And in the main, we think about that data as belonging to the consumer, and in terms of the use of that data and the operators and those people that depend on that transaction to operate safely and securely across any of those networks as well. So those principles around protecting data, and actually we've been an organization that's been processing data for decades and doing that in a safe and secure and scalable way across all of our card systems, etc. And then around that, there are services that we build out. But again, those principles around how that data is used. We're not a data business. We process and manage a huge amount of data. And across that and with insights on that, we can make sure that we protect our networks and we protect the users that are accessing and using those networks, protect those transactions, and provide safety and security for the participants across those. And also, as part of our strategy is an embrace really of new networks as we see those emerging. So alongside the ones that we design, develop, and operate, there are new networks emerging all the time. But actually applying our experience in terms of whether it's fraud management, identity management, safety and security across those networks, we're finding that we can apply a lot of that experience that we've built up over the decades to protect those new networks and provide greater trust where it's needed within those new networks as well. So it's core to our our being. It's core to our brand in terms of the trust it brings and the resilience it brings, and it's core to everything we design and build. So we recognize the rewards for good and insightful use of the data are significant, but the way in which it's used is to provide greater protection or better insight for those people whose data it is, rather than anyone else.
No, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing some insights in terms of what you're doing and how you see it in terms of your organizations. This leads me to the next question. How do you balance the voice of consumers and businesses saying, I want bigger, better, faster, with lots of data, but with the foundation of safety and soundness? George, why don't we start with you this time?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think there's in some sense, I think people are becoming much more aware of the data that exists for them, and much more aware of the importance of that, but becoming more protective. So what we see is really kind of a very strong voice of people who want to be sure that their data is protected and that their transactions are safe and secure. So in many respects, we those huge amount of new data points that exist in terms of people's mobile devices, email addresses, identifiers, whether they're their mobile phone number, etc. There's a huge number of data points now that exist for people, and all of those can be used to help us secure and make transactions safer across any of our networks. So using that insight to make sure we are dealing with the individual, it's the individual's transaction that's going ahead, I think is important, and people really do value. In our other payment networks, so the account-to-account networks, what we're seeing is a modernization program and the adoption of ISO 20022, which is a really very functionally and data-rich set of payment standards, which will allow us to transfer far more information with the payments than we've previously done. In many respects, I can reflect on, payment systems, historically were developed when actually, the speed and the ability of a network to transport data was a constraint on the design. We no longer face those constraints. So we have to think carefully about what other bits of information that can flow with the payment are of value. So, taking ISO 20022, we're seeing the emergence of new data and payment messages, which I think will be really valuable in providing better insights. So things like request to pay, request for information, which sounds quite mundane, but the ability to transport that over these payment networks is new and is of value to those organizations that want to talk about payments. So these more data-rich standards will allow us to see more, but also to do something that I think, if we think about a bank account, it's typically been as a record of something that has happened. We're now starting to see with request to pay, request for information, request and responses, once payments happen, things that people want to happen. I want to be paid. I want you to pay me. And that insight gives us additional opportunities to support their financial well-being and help them in terms of making better decisions around their cash flow, etc.
Yeah, no, very interesting points. And Eddie, what are your thoughts in terms of the data?
Yeah. So I would, when thinking about balancing sort of what consumers want for better and more data and more to do with it, but also that aspect of safety. So I would really echo what George was saying about users' awareness and how users are more savvy and more in tune with the fact that their data is being used, that their experiences may be powered by data-driven software or AI. And this is something that we've really been tapping into at Xero. So as one example, at Xero, we directly communicate with users. Again, it's sort of on our website, but also in our other user communications, precisely which of their product experiences are powered by data or by AI. So for example, you can imagine if you used any kind of social media software and you get recommendations in your feed, you might wonder, was that data driven, or is that just how it is by default? And it can be a little bit opaque. And so at Xero, we've been really, really clear by saying that, in this part of the app, in this part of your accounting or daily business workflow, this specific feature actually is powered by data and AI, and this other feature isn't. And there's two aspects to this. One is to be transparent to users to make sure that they know that we're being very responsible and very considered in how we use data and AI, but also that we set their expectations appropriately, right? That we tell users that not everything is just going to be AI-driven and data-driven just because we can. It's also about balancing that aspect of privacy and safety. Maybe one other quick aspect that I'll touch on is that Xero has set up a responsible data use advisory council. So this is made up of academics, industry veterans, who can really work strategically alongside Xero to balance this idea of what do small businesses out there really want? What are the features that could be really impactful for them based on their data? But again, balance with this sense of policy, regulation, safety, privacy, all of that. And so that's been our other approach to it.
Yeah, and I think you both raised really good points, particularly as consumers, we can relate to that. And we see that especially with social media in terms of data. What are your thoughts, Grace?
Yeah, I think consumers wanting more, bigger, better services and keeping the data safe are not fundamentally opposing views or ideas. A lot of that enablement of better data, better services comes from automation, comes from better tooling, and comes from better infrastructure. So if we can apply some of those same principles, and we can use AI to help us with data sensitivity classification, for example, or to automate some of our data management. If you think about how manual those processes are today and how much coverage we have over our data, as small or big as it is, I don't think that we can even start to enable some of these capabilities for our customers until we automate some of those processes that ultimately do make the data and the use of data a lot safer. And of course, all of the things that were mentioned previously around ensuring that those management processes are actually embedded directly into technology, into the processes that actually serve and face our customers. That's a huge part of it. And it's kind of getting those beautiful basics right. And ensuring that, BAU to innovation, you've got line of sight, you have automation, and you have the capabilities, and we're using AI on ourselves effectively to ensure that that all of the work that we're doing is data-driven, is defensible, is auditable, and ultimately in service of the customer.
No, great. Thank you. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about AI. I know you all mentioned it in your previous in your previous answers, but often discussions surrounding AI and machine learning center around possibilities. Can you share some practical examples of AI at work and what should be at the top of mind for organizations looking to do more with AI? Grace, let's start with you this time.
Yeah, I think there's endless possibility for AI, and I think the real trick is making sure that it is practical. So much of AI has been a bit academic, at least in the banking industry for some years now. But I think, again, with some of those things that I mentioned before around automation, around infrastructure, and around understanding our data, we are able now to put things like chatbots or any other kind of monitoring or sensing models into our infrastructure that allow us to really understand, to hear, to use some of those senses that are associated with AI in ways that are really important and allow us to deal more with unstructured data. I think the ISO 20022 data is actually an interesting development in this space because it does actually make that data a lot more structured. So in some ways, I think it makes the job of AI a lot easier for us to apply to some of these payment data that we're going to start seeing in November of this year. But I think there's the embedding of these models into customer-facing processes that we've done, whether it be in document processing for our mortgage applications or being able to listen for consent and certainly be able to understand behaviorally what our customers are looking for in contact center transcripts. All of that is highly practical, but a lot more possible now that we have some of this enabling infrastructure in place.
Thanks. And George, can you share a few of your examples as well?
Yeah, sure. And I think, for us, the power of some of those technology is really valuable in terms of just the scale of the networks that we're running as well, and the insights that we want to drive to keep them safe and secure. So a really good practical example of that is some of the work we do to support safety and security in faster payment networks or real-time payment networks. So in many respects, the evolution of kind of earlier real-time payment networks saw, and came in parallel with the emergence of internet banking and mobile banking, and that in parallel with new types of fraud in terms of things like malware, etc. So a lot of people, I think, initially thought of kind of real-time networks as the ability to kind of move towards real-time fraud. And there is no doubt that they do allow money to move through the network very quickly. It's one of their characteristics, and also that becomes a target for fraudsters. So some of the work that we really kind of pioneered in the UK and that we can work on and we kind of encourage people to think about in advance of going live with new real-time networks is the ability to use AI and machine learning to follow that money at a network level. So, if you're a bank and one of your customers has some account moved from their money in a kind of an authorized push payment or a fraud, then you see where it went for the first case. So, it went to the next bank along the street. But then real-time networks allow fraudsters to move that money through the network and disperse it quite quickly. So our machine learning actually, I take a more positive perspective on the real-time network, and it allows us to light up what really kind of the root cause of these risks is, which is account takeover or money mule networks. And what we've been able to do in the UK, for example, is look across the network and follow the money through the network and light up, in essence, what are groups of or are organized sets of accounts that have been taken over or have had KYC that allow them to be open where they shouldn't be, or just are genuine kind of money mule networks. So I think that's a really practical example of how we've used some of that technology and at a network level, being able to follow the money as it moves through that network to help get at the root cause of that, which might be, accounts that need to be closed or managed or monitored or blacklisted because they have become part of a fraud network.
Yeah, no, those are some really great examples, and I think ones that we're all very familiar with that really come to light. And Eddie, can you give us a few examples of how you use AI as well?
Sure. Yeah, I of course love talking about AI and different examples. So we've all been talking about digital payments and digital payments infrastructure and standards. I'd like to provide another example that's a little bit contrasting. So let's say I'm a small business. Maybe I'm starting a bakery. First thing I need to do is buy all of my kitchen equipment. But some of those transactions, the payments might not be purely digital. Maybe I have some invoices, and I need to connect that digitally to my accounting software, for example. So these invoices could literally be on physical paper. And so there's some kind of interface of how do I get the data on that physical paper into the digital world? And so that's one of the examples I'd like to talk about at Xero that we've worked on, where we have an AI system that can take receipts, invoices, other documents, understand the text on it, and also understand the financial context. Who is being paid, how much, when is it due, and what is the tax rate, and so on. And so what this really does is it allows users to interface seamlessly and accurately between records of transactions, right, pieces of paper in the real physical world, and sort of absorb that into the digital world. And that's something that I think is quite unique about AI. I know there's a lot of hype about possibilities of AI, but I think one aspect of that hype that's well deserved is the scale that it enables. So the system I just talked about for scanning receipts and invoices and making them digital, that processes at Xero millions of documents a month. From rough calculations, saves advisors and businesses hundreds of thousands of hours a year in manual data entry. And that system is built and maintained by a team of around 10 people. And that's quite extraordinary scale. There are other technologies cannot scale quite the same way as AI. And so, that's something I find very interesting and very, very empowering about the practical benefits of AI.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting perspective as well. No, thank you. And I think we have time for one last question. So when it comes to making the most of your data, what is the most important lessons you've learned along the way? Grace, let's start again with you.
Sure. So I think one of the best lessons that we've learned as an organization is that in order to make it so that data is not just produced, but it's consumed and it's presented in ways that provide value to our customers, we need to activate what I call the virtuous cycle between technology, data, and analytics. So technology creates data. Data is necessary for modeling, and models need to be re-embedded back into technology in order to support all of those customer-facing and employee-facing processes and technologies that I mentioned before. And where I think sometimes we struggle as an industry or struggle as a discipline in analytics and data is that it's all about the modeling, and it's not necessarily about being able to make it easy for that modeling to occur. So if you think about any modeling exercise that any of us do, and I hope that this is unique to us, but I suspect it's not, that about 70, 80, even 90% of the time is in finding and cleaning and revalidating the data. And what we're trying to do and what we've really spent a lot of time over the last couple of years investing in is some of the operating model and some of the joint prioritization and shared accountability around delivering that data from source all the way to consumption throughout the organization, so that that activity, every investment that we make, every model that we build, we're creating a reusable asset that can ultimately start to scale, to Eddie's point, to scale across the organization and start to serve a lot of different use cases at the same time. So, when I think about how we're actually taking the promise of data and analytics into the reality for our customers, it's really around some of those beautiful basics again, around how we work together, how we coordinate our initiatives and our priorities and our accountabilities across data, analytics, and technology in order to unleash that virtuous cycle. And then ultimately, the fourth stakeholder in all of that has to be the business. And sometimes data and analytics can be a very abstract concept to people who aren't very familiar with the discipline. So bringing them along, having them co-own that journey and co-invest in that journey, especially from a learning and culture change perspective, has been massively helpful in ensuring that we deliver actual value from our data and analytics activities.
Thanks, Grace. No, that's really interesting to hear some of the lessons that you've learned. George, what are some of the lessons that you've learned?
Sure. I mean, I think it goes back to kind of a principle of doing something kind of really useful for your participants. And so, by that we mean the examples I gave around kind of fraud management and protection of the networks that we operate and make them safe for the users on them. But also when we think about some of the new networks that are opening up. So things like open banking. So we made an acquisition last year of Finicity, and the reason we really liked what they were doing with open banking is that they were using it primarily to improve the credit worthiness and the credit capacity, access for consumers by using the information that was available through the open banking networks, and just allowing rather than previous credit history or ownership or existing credit experience, looking at what can be generated in terms of an understanding of things like credit worthiness when given permission to access transaction or payment data, and how that can help small businesses. I think Eddie touched on it in terms of some of the postcode lotteries that existed for businesses and consumers to get access to credit, overcoming that with some real information and some real insight that's available to us through open networks there. So I think there's a sense of doing something that's good and useful and that you have permission to do from the people whose data you're getting access to. And then the other principle around safety and security across those payment networks that we operate. And I've been fascinated in terms of the read across and the opportunities I think that exist now for us as an organization that has both, as I said, card and account-to-account networks. So I see some of the work being done on the card networks in terms of device and transaction profiling that we haven't traditionally had on the networks for account-to-account. And I see that as a further opportunity for better data insights and better protection at a network level as well. So I think, those principles of safety and security and value to the organization, the consumer or the business whose data you're actually being entrusted to process or et cetera is really important.
No, all great. Yeah, all great points. And Eddie, how about you in terms of some of the lessons that you've learned along the way?
Sure. So when it comes to really making as much as you can or the most of the data that you have, often that leads to the question of, data looks like this open field of opportunity, and you think, oh yeah, how can I use this data to power some AI system and get a lot of value out of that? But in a way, it's a little bit of a double-edged blade. It can actually backfire because I really link this back to or echoes what Grace was saying earlier, that you'd think building an AI system or leveraging your data is about this fancy model that knows everything, it's seen all the patterns before. Maybe to some extent that's true, but when you look at the actual work and the effort and the timeline that goes into it, a lot of it is the system that surrounds it, right? Validating that data, deploying the model, making sure the model is safe, responsibly built, responsibly maintained. Maybe said another way, it's high capital investment. If I go back to that bakery analogy, a weird similarity between leveraging data and AI and opening bakeries is that you need that high capital investment to start, right? You have to buy the equipment or invest in all of this AI system infrastructure. And so tying this all back to an important lesson that we've really learned at Xero along the way is that you should only use AI in data systems when simpler solutions won't work, right? You shouldn't just use it as the hammer that you hit every single nail with. It shouldn't be your immediate first go-to. It's this high capital investment, but very powerful and very scalable tool you should use only when it's really the right tool for the job.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I think we have a few minutes left. I don't know if anyone else had anything else that they wanted to add, or if not, we can wrap up. But I think it was great to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to participate in the panel.
Yeah, no, thank you all for your time. It's been a pleasure. It was really, you're a great group of speakers. It was great to hear more about your journey and learning more about data and AI. So I want to thank the audience for their time and their interest. And I hope that they've gained some insights during this interesting discussion and they enjoy the rest of their sessions. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.